While the Second World War was ongoing, 2 soldiers on leave were shot and killed by Paul Cantrell supporters in Athens, Tennessee. There was a common fear that they were violent when G.I.s got back from the war. With no support from the local newspaper and not readily being taken under employment, the servicemen were anxious to do something about it. Police swindled the G.I.s' pay made to them upon discharge through means of false charges on the former servicemen by groups of deputies that would grab every G.I. they could find, trying to get that money off of them, as these deputies, or so they were called, were fee grabbers and weren't on salary back then. The laws of Tennessee provided a chance for the crooked to thrive. Roughly 3,000 military veterans were returning to McMinn County after the war, constituting almost 10% of the county's population. Some tried to field their own nonpartisan candidates working for a fraud-free election, and a nonpartisan lineup of candidates was selected.
There were several beer joints and honky-tonks around Athens. We were pretty wild. We started having trouble with the law enforcement at that time because they started making a habit of picking up G.I.s and fining them heavily for almost anything. They were kind of making a racket out of it. After long hard years of service, most of us were hardcore veterans of World War II. We were used to drinking our liquor and our beer without being molested. When those things happened, the G.I.s got madder the more G.I.s they arrested. The more G.I.s they arrested, the more they beat up. The more they beat up, the madder we got.
The sheriff and his deputies received a fee for every person they booked, incarcerated, and released. The more human transactions, the more money they got. A voucher signed by the sheriff was all that was needed to collect the money from the courthouse. Deputies routinely boarded buses passing through and dragged sleepy-eyed passengers to the jail to pay their $16.50 fine for drunkenness, whether they were guilty or not. Arrests ran as high as 115 per weekend. The fee system was profitable, but record keeping was required, and the money could be traced. It was less troublesome to collect kickback for allowing roadhouses to operate openly. Cooperative owners would point out influential patrons. Prostitution, liquor, and gambling grew so prevalent that it became common knowledge in Tennessee that Athens was wide open. They carefully made their list match the electoral demographics of the county, including a veteran of the North African campaign, Knox Henry, as candidate for sheriff in opposition to Cantrell. Despite numerous complaints about the corruption since 1940, the U.S. Department of Justice, under the control of Franklin Roosevelt, ignored citizens' charges of election fraud and did not respond. Large contributions made by local businessmen to the GI campaign made certain it was well funded to go against the almost certainly rigged election. Well aware of the methods of Sheriff Mansfield and his associates, with their slogan, "Your vote will be counted as cast," the League organized a counterpoise. A fighting bunch was organized by Bill White to keep the thugs from beating up G.I.s and keep them from taking the election. White laid his plan out cautiously, later recalling,
"I got out and started organizing with a bunch of G.I.s. Well spirits. I learned that you get the poor boys out of poor families, and the ones that was frontline warriors that's done fighting and didn't care to bust a cap on you. I learned to do that. So that's what I picked. I had 30 men and I took what mustering out pay I got and bought pistols. And some of them had pistols. I had 30 men organized."
fighting for the basic right to vote. The veterans numbered over 450, ready at any need. In response, Sheriff Mansfield hired 200 more deputies for the upcoming election. Most from neighboring counties, some from out of state. At $50 a day, equivalent to $695. In the week before the battle, Mansfield denied that 2 men arrested on July 30th with the shipment of liquor were deputies, even though they admitted they were and had been delivering election whiskey. Downtown merchants announced that all stores would be closed on election day to give employees a chance to vote, although this had not been necessary in previous elections. The merchants were perhaps following the example of the mayor of Athens. Cantrell warned that the veterans had printed sample ballots with the intention of stuffing ballot boxes. The veterans offered a $1,000 reward for verifiable information about election fraud. One of the many GI delegates qualified to observe a polling post was upcoming election ballot man Knox Henry. Endeavoring to ensure honest elections, a month ahead of the primaries, they petitioned the FBI to send election monitors. As with previous requests for help to restore rule of law, their requests were ignored. Polls for the county election day opened August 1st, 1946. Normally there were only 15 patrolmen on duty for the precincts, but there was about 200 armed cops patrolling this election, many out of county and out of state deputies, to make certain it goes how Mansfield planned. Walter Ellis, a legally appointed GI representative, monitoring polling in the courthouse, protested the irregularities and was arrested and charged with what was explained to him as a federal offense. Veterans were ejected by police from polling sites, and in one instance, a deputy pointed his gun at them as they attempted to re-enter a poll and shouted,
"You sons of bitches cross this street. I'll kill you."
By 3 p.m., Tom Gillespie, an elderly black farmer from Union Road, stepped inside the 11th Precinct polling place in the Athens Waterworks on Jackson Street. Wendy Wise, a Cantrell guard, told Gillespie,
"N-word, you can't vote here."
Around 3 p.m., when Patrolman CM Wendy Wise prevented the elderly African-American farmer, Tom Gillespie, from casting his ballot at the Athens Waterworks polling place, the Gillespie and a GI poll watcher objected, so Wise struck Gillespie with brass knuckles, which caused Gillespie to drop his ballot and run from the deputy. Wise then pulled his pistol and shot Gillespie in the back. This would be the first blood in a citywide battle that would follow. GIs gathered in front of L.L. Schaefer's store, which was used as an office by campaign manager Jim Buttram. Buttram had telegraphed Governor McCord in Nashville and Tom Clark, asking for help in ensuring a lawful election, and received no response. Otto Kennedy, not an ex-GI himself, but a political advisor to the veterans, entered the office and announced that Cantrell had posted armed guards at each precinct. They all knew this move was in preparation for the 4 p.m. poll closings, when the ballot boxes would be moved to the jail for counting. But the group had already learned that Sheriff Mansfield sent armed guards to all the polling places. A small group of veterans called for an armed mobilization. Buttram declined. So did Kennedy, but he offered the rear of his S&K garage and tire shop across the street as a meeting hall. Once the posse crossed the street, they convened in the S&K garage, where they decided to arm themselves in return as quickly as possible. In the commotion that followed after Tom Gillespie protesting and Wise striking him with brass knuckles and being shot by Wise with the pistol in the back, the first shot of the day brought crowds streaming up Jackson from the courthouse. Sheriff Mansfield's cruiser turned off College Street and screeched to a halt in front of the waterworks, and deputies loaded the bleeding Gillespie into the car. Mansfield ordered the precinct closed, posted 4 deputies outside to guard the waterworks, and then took Gillespie to jail. A dozen veterans from the S&K started up Jackson toward the waterworks. They were unarmed at the time. Bob Harrell and Leslie Dooley, who had lost an arm in the North Africa theater, were assigned as the GI poll watchers. A polling place for the 12th precinct had been set up in the back of the Dixie Cafe, across Hornsby Alley from the jail, and it was commanded by Minus Wilburn. For Cantrell. Throughout the day, they had observed Wilburn letting minors vote and handing to adult voters. Despite the fact that she had no poll tax receipt and that her name did not appear on the registration list, Wilburn attempted to allow an underage woman to vote. Harrell's patience gave out. As Wilburn reached to deposit the ballot, Harrell grabbed his wrist. Wilburn slapped him across the head with a blackjack and kicked him in the face as he fell to the ground. Wilburn closed the precinct, ordered Hornsby Alley blocked at both ends, and with a procession of guards, crossed the lawn to the jail with the ballot box and the GIs as captives. Harrell was brutally beaten and was taken to the hospital. The Cantrell forces had calculated if they could control the 1st, 11th, and 12th precincts in Athens and the one in Etowah, the election was theirs. The ballot boxes from the waterworks, the 11th, and the Dixie Cafe, the 12th, were safely in the jail. The courthouse, the voting place for the 1st precinct, was barricaded by deputies who held 4 GIs hostage, and Paul Cantrell himself had Etowah under control. The 2 GI poll watchers, Ed Vestal and Charles Scott, had been seized and held hostage inside the waterworks by Wise and another Cantrell deputy, Carl Neal. When the veterans reached the waterworks, the crowd began taunting the armed guards. As Wise and Neal stood at a window watching the angry mob outside, Vestal and Scott plunged through the plate glass windows and ran, bleeding for the protection of the crowd. Wise stepped through the broken glass, waving his pistol. Several veterans rushed forward, but were quickly pulled back to safety. One of them shouted,
"Let's go get our guns."
in response to cussing and taunts from the deputies, shooting of Tom Gillespie, and the action so far that day. Bill White told his lieutenant, Edsel Underwood, to take 5 or 6 men and break into the National Guard armory to steal weapons. Being short of arms and plenty ammunition enough to challenge Mansfield's army and retrieve the ballot boxes, these men took keys to the local National and State Guard armories and requisitioned 3 M1 rifles, 5 Colt 45 pistols, a large quantity of British Enfield rifles, 2 Thompson submachine guns, and ammo. Lone Selber says White went for the guns himself. Bill White, who had fought in the Pacific while still in his teens and came home an ex-sergeant, had gotten angrier as the day wore on. At 2 in the afternoon, he had harangued the group of veterans in the S&K, saying, "You call yourselves G.I.s? You go over there and fight for 3 and 4 years. You come back and you let a bunch of draft dodgers who stayed here where it was safe and you were making it safe for them push you around. If you people don't stop this, and now is the time and place, you people wouldn't make a pimple on a fighting G.I.'s ass. Get guns." In the early evening, White went to get the guns himself. He sent 2 G.I.s to get a truck, and, with a few other veterans, perhaps a dozen, he headed for the National Guard Armory. There, he said in a 1969 interview, he broke down the armory doors and took all the rifles, 2 Thompson submachine guns, and all the ammunition we could carry, loaded it up on a 2-ton truck, and went back to GI headquarters and passed out 70 high-powered rifles and 2 bandoliers of ammunition with each one to each of the 60 GIs. The vets then went to the jail, where they offered the deputies safe exit if they would turn over the ballot boxes. The deputies declined and shot 2 of the vets. The GIs returned fire in a pitched gunfight that would continue into the early morning hours of August 2nd, when a group of vets from neighboring McMinn County planted explosive devices onto the jail's porch. Shortly thereafter, the deputies did surrender, and the GIs secured the building and the ballots. By another account, there was a guns-drawn confrontation between Jim Buttram, who was accompanied by Scott's father and Sheriff Mansfield. A third account argues that when Neil Esminger showed up to get a vote count, his arrival was a distraction that allowed Scott and Vestal to break through a door and escape. The escape was followed by gunfire, which sent the crowd diving for cover and the band of former servicemen to head for the S&K garage. Cantrell and Mansfield had deserted their deputies and disappeared into the dark early in the battle. Most were back at the S&K armed. In the meantime, Chief Deputy Bo Dunn had his men form a line from the building to his cruiser, and the ballot box was carried out to the car. Wise told Dunn about the GI's threat. The chief deputy ordered 2 of his men to GI headquarters to arrest those whom Wise could identify. The rest of the deputies piled into the cruiser, which sped back toward the jail. Deputy Chief Bo Dunn took the 2 deputies and the ballot box to the jail. A crowd began to gather outside. 3 more deputies came with pistols drawn, only to be pummeled and dragged inside. When 2 more deputies reached the GI headquarters, they were disarmed and taken prisoner. Otto Kennedy, as GI advisor, asked Bill White what he was going to do. White said, "I don't know, Otto. I don't know. We might just kill them." The crowd began to demand the lives of the captives. According to White, Kennedy grew alarmed and announced,
"Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord. No, I'm not having nothing else to do with this. Me and my brother and son-in-law is leaving here."
Then Kennedy left, vowing to have no part in murder. The crowd began to disperse, and most of the G.I.s left. Soon, a small nucleus of veterans were alone with 7 hostages. The remaining G.I.s took the 7 deputies turned hostages to the woods 10 miles from Athens, stripped them, tied them to a tree, and beat them. It's said more deputies were dispatched to arrest Scott and Vestal, but were disarmed and detained by G.I.s. As the polls closed and counting began, minus the 3 boxes taken to the jail, the G.I.-backed candidates had a 3-1 lead. When the G.I.s heard the deputies had taken the ballot boxes to the jail, Bill White exclaimed, "Boy, they doing something. I'm glad they done that. Now all we gotta do is whip on the jail." By 6 p.m., it seemed to be over. G.I. headquarters was deserted, and unhappy crowds moved quietly along the streets. Another election had been stolen, and nothing could be done about it. At the Strand movie theater across from the courthouse, the marquee read, "Coming soon, gunning for vengeance." The G.I.s recognized that they had broken the law, and Cantrell would likely receive reinforcements in the morning. The G.I.s felt the need to resolve the situation quickly. The deputies knew little of battle tactics, but the G.I.s knew them well. By taking up the second floor of a bank across the street from the jail, the G.I.s were able to return fire from the jail with a barrage from above. By 9 p.m., Paul Cantrell, Pat Mansfield, George Woods, Speaker of the State House of Representatives and Secretary of the McMinn County Election Commission, and about 50 deputies were in the jail, allegedly rummaging through the ballot boxes. Woods and Mansfield constituted much of the election commission and could therefore certify and validate the count from within the jail. The presence of Mansfield and Woods meant that a majority of the election commission was on hand, so the tallies could be certified and validated on the spot. More deputies were still barricaded in the courthouse, but along the streets, none were to be seen. If the Cantrell forces had been a bit more wary, they might have spotted some shadows slipping up the embankment directly across the street from the jail. Opinion differs on exactly how the challenge was issued. White says he was the one to call it out. "Would you damn bastards bring those damn ballot boxes out here, or are we gonna set siege against the jail and blow it down?" Moments later, the night exploded in automatic weapons fire, punctuated by shotgun blasts. "I fired the first shot," White claimed. Then, everybody started shooting from our side. A deputy ran for the jail. "I shot him." He wheeled and fell inside of the jail. Bullets ricocheted up and down White Street. I shot a second man. His leg flew out from under him, and he crawled under a car. The veterans bombarded the jail for hours, but Cantrell and his accomplices, secure behind the red brick walls, refused to surrender. As the uncertain battle dragged past midnight, the G.I.s began to have some uneasy second thoughts. They knew that they had violated local, state, and federal laws that night, and if Cantrell was not routed before his rescuers arrived, they might spend the rest of their lives in prison. Rumors compounded their fears. "The National Guard's on the way. The state troopers are here." Birch Biggs and his gang are coming. Biggs ran Polk County more ruthlessly than Cantrell ran McMinn, supposedly. If the veterans had known the truth, they would have been less apprehensive. George Woods had telephoned Biggs earlier that night for help. Biggs was not there, but his son Broughton took the call. His answer: "Do you think I'm crazy?" Woods then slipped out of town. An attempt by deputies outside the jail to reinforce or take refuge in the jail was thwarted by Bill White's fighting band. Some people in the jail managed to escape out the back door. For the veterans, it was either win before morning or face a long time in jail for violating all the laws. Rumors spread, and White made hourly demands for surrender. G.I.s attempted to bombard the jail with Molotov cocktails, but were not able to throw them far enough to reach the jail. The G.I.s decided to resort to dynamite. At about that time, an ambulance pulled up to the jail. The G.I.s assumed it was called to remove the wounded and held their fire. 2 men jumped in, and it sped off, carrying Paul Cantrell and Sheriff Mansfield safely out of town. Then the dynamite was deployed. Bill White said, "We'd put 2 or 3 sticks of dynamite together and tape it together, and put a cap in there and a fuse, and we'd rear back and throw them. Well, we couldn't get them all the way to the jail. We got them out to the cars. They'd blow them cars up in the air and turn them over and land them back on the top. Several cars down there were blowing up." That first bomb landed under Bob Dunn's cruiser, flipping it on its back. Bill White, commander of the fighting bunch, knew the G.I.s had to do better. White said, "We're gonna have to get some charges up there on that jail. Make a couple charges there. We'll go down there and we'll play some charges." So we made a couple charges, and I crawled up and put a charge on the jailhouse porch. In fact, 3 bombs went off almost simultaneously. One destroyed Mansfield's car, one landed on the jail porch roof, and one went off against the jail wall. The bombs caused some damage to the jail and scattered debris. As with the beginning of the battle, accounts of the end differ. In the end, the door of the jail was dynamited and breached. The barricaded deputies, some with injuries, surrendered, and the ballot boxes were recovered. It was a bloody night, and it ended after the G.I.s detonated 3 homemade demolition charges. Estimates of the number of veterans besieging the jail vary from several hundred to as high as 2,000. Bill White had at least 60 men under his command. White split his group with Buck Landers, taking up position at the bank, overlooking the jail, while White took the rest to the post office. Just as estimates of people involved vary widely, accounts of how the Battle of Athens began and its course of events diverge. Egerton and Williams recall that when the men reached the jail, it was barricaded and manned by 55 deputies. The veterans demanded the ballot boxes but were refused. They then opened fire on the jail, initiating a battle that lasted several hours by some accounts, considerably less by others. The veterans were eager to end the battle. With the Cantrell forces conquered, 10 years of suppressed rage exploded. Minus Wilburn, a particularly unpopular deputy, had his throat slashed. Biscuit Ferris, Cantrell's prison superintendent, had his jaw shattered by a bullet, and Wendy Wise was kicked and beaten senseless. Joined by a number of their fellows, the G.I.s cleared the jail of the rioters and locked up their prisoners for the night. At dawn, the veterans slipped from the jail, made their way through the detritus of the battle, and dispersed into what they hoped would be anonymity. Miraculously, there had been no actual deaths, but on August 2nd, a page 1 headline in the New York Times wrongly trumpeted the news. Tennessee sheriff is slain in primary day violence. All day long, reporters with cameras and notebooks poured into town to photograph, question, analyze, and write a massive misunderstanding of the actual events at the time. Stephen Bynum wrote in 1984 that there was a volley of fire that lasted for several hours, although gives no exact time for the end of the hostilities or an account of the course of the battle. He noted the deputies surrendered at 3:30 a.m. If you boil it down, that's what it came to. Byram wrote, by 3:30 a.m., the men holding the jail had been dynamited into submission, and by early morning, George Woods was calling Ralph Dogan to ask if he could come to Athens and certify the election of the G.I.s slate. Bill White reported that when the G.I.s broke into the jail, they found some of the tally sheets marked by the machine had been scored 15-1 for the Cantrell forces. When the final tally was completed, Knox Henry was elected. During the fight at the jail, rioting had broken out in Athens, mainly targeting police cars. This continued after the ballot boxes were recovered, but subsided by morning. The mob also destroyed automobiles of the deputies, many bearing out-of-state plates. During the disorder, the mayor of Athens was on vacation, and the city policemen were nowhere to be found. The morning of August 2nd found the town quiet. Some minor acts of revenge happened, but the public mood was one of euphoria that had not been experienced in McMinn County in a long time. Governor McCord initially moved to activate the National Guard, but quickly rescinded the order. The morning saw the disciplined G.I.s call a meeting. G.I. Non-Partisan League Treasurer Harry Johnson opened the meeting, observing it was necessary because, for some reason or other, the sheriff's office is not around. The approximately 400 persons in the courtroom elected a special committee, headed by Methodist minister Bernie Hampton, joined by C.A. Anderson and Gobo Cartwright, both members of the Businessmen's Evangelical Committee, to preserve law and order. George Woods, the escaped secretary of the County Election Commission, sent a written missive saying, "Next Monday at 10 a.m. I will sign an election certificate certifying that the G.I. ticket was elected." The veterans turned responsibility for maintaining order in Athens to Police Chief Herbert Walker. The G.I. said they were holding control of McMinn County until September 1st, when Knox Henry was to be installed as a sheriff. August 2nd also saw the return to McMinn County of Sheriff-elect Knox Henry, who had spent the night of August 1st through 2nd in safekeeping in the Sweetwater Jail. Sheriff Henry, a 33-year-old former Army Air Force sergeant, noted, "They were going to kill me yesterday, and I had to leave town." The victory of the veterans that night in August 1946 appeared at first to have settled nothing. The national press was almost unanimous in condemning the action of the G.I.s. The syndicated columnist Robert C. Rourke commented, "There is very little difference, essentially, between a vigilante and a member of a lynch mob, and if we are seeking an answer to crooked politics, the one that the Athens boy just propounded sure ain't it." Armed G.I.s patrolled the streets that were still tense with rumors of a Mansfield army poised to reclaim Athens. Hundreds of men were issued permits to carry weapons, and machine guns on rooftops guarded the approaches to town. Several times, groups of veterans rushed to barricade roads and occasionally they terrorized innocent travelers in their attempt to thwart an invasion that never came. In adjacent Meigs County, Oscar Womack ordered some associates to burn a bunch of ballots. The Peakland ballot box was taken at gunpoint by Womack and companions from the county clerk's office the day before the ballot burning. In Monroe County, east of McMinn County and north of Polk County, 65-year-old County Sheriff Jake Tipton was shot and killed during a dispute at the Vail precinct.
They put me in as a deputy. One of the reasons they put me in as a deputies was to scare them G.I.s.
In the initial momentum of victory, a $5,000 salary cap for city officers, gambling houses in collusion with the Cantrell regime were raided and their operations demolished. Deputies of the prior administration resigned and were replaced. The ballots, when tallied, proved a landslide for the GI Non-Partisan League. Scores of veterans were present when Speaker of the State House of Representatives George Woods, Secretary of the McMinn County Election Commissioners, was marched into the county courthouse under the guard of ex-GIs. Speaker Woods had fled after the gun battle. League member Knox Henry received 2,175 votes against 1,270 for Sheriff Cantrell. The League also won the other races. Bill White was made a sheriff's deputy.
They wanted me to control the G.I.s, which if they fired into them people's houses and everything else, that was my job, to get out there and keep the G.I.s straight. And I did. I had 16 fights in one weekend, fighting G.I.s, keeping them from shooting them people's houses and beating up people. My fists got so sore I couldn't stick them in my pocket. If you fight them with your fists, they had respect for you. But you didn't use blackjacks or guns on them. If you did, they'd gang up on you and kill you.
According to Deputy Bill White, the fee basis for deputy pay continued for 4 more years. It was only the last 4 years he served that he was paid a salary. On August 11, 1946, the 5 GIs elected to office in McMinn announced that they would return to the county all fees in excess of $5,000. Elsewhere in Tennessee, E.H. Crump and his machine were finally on the way out, with the election of Governor Gordon Browning and a young United States Senator, Estes Kefauver. In early September, the fall of the county political machine was followed by the resignation of Athens Mayor Paul Walker and the town's 4 aldermen. The resignations met with popular approval. The resignations came after a nighttime shotgun blast through the front of Alderman Hugh Riggs' home. Mayor Walker had previously refused a demand to resign, made immediately after the gunfight by the McMinn County American Legion and VFW posts. For a full year afterward, the national press seized upon the most insignificant news from Athens as evidence of the veterans' lawlessness. There was remarkably little criminal prosecution in the wake of that violent night. Only one man had charges brought up against him. Wendy Wise, the deputy who shot the old black farmer, Tom Gillespie, drew a sentence of 1 to 3 years. Movements of veterans in other Tennessee counties promoted statewide coalition against corrupt political machines in the upcoming November elections. Governor McCord countered an attempt to form a nonpartisan GI political league by directing the Young Democrats clubs of Tennessee to poach and recruit ex-G.I.s. There were strenuous efforts by the Crump organization, based in Shelby County, to counter the emerging G.I. organization. A convention held in Alamo, Tennessee, with the intention of establishing a new national party, was discouraged by General Evans Carlson of the United States Marine Corps, who argued that the G.I.s should work through the existing political parties. The new G.I. government of Athens quickly encountered challenges, including the re-emergence of old party loyalties. The G.I. administration in Athens eventually collapsed. Tennessee's G.I. political movement then dissipated, and government returned to normal. Historian Dan Daly wrote, "It was a violent but decisive clash of two social and political cultures between the past and the future of rural, state, and ultimately the federal government, and a reconfirmation of the deeply ingrained ideal that Americans can assert themselves against tyranny, even when it was taking place in their own backyard." Knox Henry served 2 terms as a sheriff of McMinn County and was succeeded by Otto Kennedy. Paul Cantrell, after seeking temporary asylum in Chattanooga, returned to Etowah and continued to operate the bank there with his brothers. They are all dead now, as is Jim Buttram. Otto Kennedy lived in Athens. Pat Mansfield returned secretly to Athens on August 8, 1946, to resign his membership on the Election Commission. He met with Otto Kennedy for 2 hours, apparently with no ill feeling on either side, and then announced,
"I'm through with politics. For good. It'll sure mess you up sometimes. I'm going back to railroading."
In the mid-50s, Athens was isolated by a new highway that intercepts Highway 11 south of Nyota and rejoins it at Riceville. Along it, a new Athens grew. A town with a McDonald's, Kawasaki, and a Pizza Hut. If you ask people along the street about the election of August 1946, they'll reference White Street and maybe something about a shootout, but most have forgotten or don't wish to remember. Lady Eleanor Roosevelt on the Battle of Athens. Any local, state, or national government, or any political machine, in order to live, must give the people assurance that they can express their will freely, and that their votes will be counted. The most powerful political machine cannot exist without the support of the people. Political bosses and political machinery can be good, but the minute they cease to express the will of the people, their days are numbered. This is a lesson which wise political leaders learn young, and you can be pretty sure that when a boss stays in power, he gives the majority of the people what they think they want. If he is bad and indulges in practices which are dishonest, or if he acts for his own interests alone, the people are unwilling to condone these practices. When the people decide that conditions in their town, county, state, or country must change, they will change them. If the leadership has been wise, they will be able to do it peacefully through a secret ballot, which is honestly counted. But if the leader has become inflated and too sure of his own importance, he may bring about the kind of action which was taken in Tennessee